what's the guy's name? The electricity.
David Blaine.
No, the electricity guy.
Nikolai Tesla.
Thank you.
Welcome to Shat on TV Lovecraft Country, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the new HBO series, Lovecraft Country. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Ashley Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And this is our deep dive episode where we look back on this week's episode of Lovecraft Country and provide our thoughts and analysis, plus top listener email and voicemail for the week. This week's episode was episode 2 of Lovecraft Country, Whitey's on the Moon. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode. You can do that wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting shatontv.com/subscribe. And we'll have an instant reaction live stream every Sunday night on Twitch. You can find that immediately after Lovecraft Country airs. Go to shatontv.com/Twitch. Now, Ash, you and the King Bee did the Twitch stream Lovecraft Live without me on Sunday while I was on vacation. Thank you so much for doing that, for hosting that. You did a fantastic job.
Yes, please don't ever leave me alone again, because doing that while trying to look at the chat and talking by myself, you feel like you're talking to no one, but you're actually talking to everyone. It's very strange, but it was fun though. And what I'm really excited about is that I was telling you beforehand, we have so many new people that are on who have these fantastic ideas. And please know out there that I wrote everything down, and we're going to be addressing all of the big topics that you guys wanted to address, some of which I hadn't even thought about. So thanks so much to everybody for being there and contributing, because I think that our episodes are so much better because all of you are involved.
So Ash, I went to shatontv.com/Twitch and watched the Lovecraft Live episode from last night to get caught up and see what the conversation was. You and I have not had an opportunity to discuss the show. So now that it is Monday night, we've had some time to think about it. What stood out to you about the episode?
I think the main thing for me is I talked last week about tonality and about how I was concerned about what the show wanted to be. And I think we got a bit of a clearer picture of that this week. I think we're definitely in this kind of monster of the week, almost kind of Twilight Zone type territory, which I actually think is going to be really fun if they stick with that. I think kind of from those opening credits to the way they resolved an entire storyline in just one episode, we're getting one monster, we're getting an exploration into that monster, and it seems, looking at the trailer for next week, we're moving on after that. Like I said, I'm okay with that, but admittedly, it is a much different format than I expected, or any of you that are out there that are book readers. I got a lot of feedback on social media today where people are like, I feel like I have whiplash because I read the book and this is not, like, it's so different than the book. And I told them the same thing I felt once Game of Thrones got past season 6, which is that it's kind of exciting not to know what's going to happen. I think that makes it more enjoyable. I will say I'm feeling lots of influences here. I'll repeat what I said on Twitch. This episode felt very Charmed meets Are You Afraid of the Dark meets National Treasure. You can see that they're kind of pulling in all these different influences. And I don't know about you, Gene, but I felt big time Rocky Horror Picture vibes with them being trapped and these hallucinations and all of that. And I mean, I think that has to be intentional, right? But overall, I do worry for those of you out there that have not read the book, because there was so much exposition in 59 minutes, but fear not. That is what we are here for. And I'm excited to kind of dive into that with y'all tonight.
My big takeaway from the episode was finally starting to recognize the formula for Lovecraft Country. We said in the last episode, we weren't quite sure what the show wanted to be. And King B and I kind of talked about the fact that we sort of labeled it ahead of time instead of actually waiting to see what the show actually presented. And what I'm starting to see is that you're going to have a couple scares, but nothing's going to be too scary. There's probably going to be one monster revelation per episode, either a new monster or learning something about a monster we've seen. There's an eclectic mix of styles. So you have some comedy, some action, horror, some sci-fi. And there's generally going to be one amazing voiceover that hammers home the point of the episode. So in the last episode, we had James Baldwin. Here we have Gil Scott-Heron. And, there's a bit of spoken word here. It's Whitey's on the Moon. It's the title of the episode. And I'd be interested to see if they build on it each episode, because in episode 1, we had James Baldwin, and he was answering that question of whether the American dream came at a cost to Black Americans. And now Gil Scott-Heron is asking if funding our greatest technical achievement, going to the moon, also came at the cost of marginalizing minorities, right? So for people who didn't catch Whitey's on the Moon, the basic point of this spoken word piece set over drums is that we've got real problems here on Earth. My sister's been bitten by a rat, and the medical care we can't even afford, but great for you guys. You guys are up on the moon. So I thought that it was that pattern, if it sticks with the rest of the season, I would love to see it. And I look forward to seeing what spoken word pieces or what audio clips they use in the future. So the rest of what we're going to discuss during the podcast, and you haven't listened before, during the deep dive, we go topic to topic. We're not going to go scene by scene. So we're going to give it to you really, really fast and cover the big ideas. And also, a lot of people had some difficulty understanding this episode. That was some of the feedback that we got during Lovecraft Live. And so Ash and I have gone through, done the research, and we're going to talk to you about the new characters that we saw on screen, Atticus's lineage, how everything goes all the way from Titus Braithwhite down to Atticus, the Order of the Ancient Dawn, what they're all about, the hallucinations. A lot of people were asking what was real and what was a hallucination in this episode. So Ash has that for you. And then finally, we're going to get to several voicemail and email that we have from listeners. And please stick around for that, because it is fantastic. But without further ado, Ash, let's get to the new characters that were introduced in this episode.
Sure. So we're going to talk about 4, because we were introduced to 4 characters, one of which we met, Montrose, that we were introduced to in terms of who he was last week. And what I wanted to kind of do was boil it down to, like, if you saw them and like their basic description, and then talk about them. So Samuel Braithwhite, he's the leader of the Order of the Ancient Dawn. He's a liver donor. He's a racist figurehead. And now he's a dead statue, right? So this is the guy who in the episode we meet. He's played by Tony Goldwyn. He looks like an evil white guy, and he's got a great pair of eyeglasses. And basically he is the guy now that is running the Order of the Ancient Dawn, which we're going to talk about at length in a second. He also is the individual that seems to have orchestrated this entire meetup. He's the reason why he wants Tick there, to have Tick come to basically be the conduit for this ceremony that we're going to talk about. And like I said, he's a liver donor. He had his own liver cut out. I did do a rabbit hole of research today about how much of your liver you could cut off and survive, because it looked like they took the whole thing. But apparently you can cut off about 3/4 of your liver and then it regenerate. So I guess it was enough to go around, but he did that to give of himself and to be a part of this organization and to mimic the people who have come before. And I call him a racist figurehead because that's what he is. He's clearly a racist guy. He has no use for Tick. He wishes that he wasn't there. He makes that horrible comment about his skin color upon meeting him, about the fact that he is darker complected than he quote unquote assumed he would be. And so he's just basically a bad dude, your typical big bad. And luckily we only had to deal with him for one episode because he got turned to stone and crushed by a falling ceiling, which I felt okay with.
And people might dismiss this Samuel Braithwhite character as being like too obvious or too cliche, but I think that is part of the style of the show, right? So if somebody is involved in the occult, they're probably going to be wearing a hood. If somebody, something is a monster, it's going to look outright monstrous. And don't fight it. Like, go with it. Like, that is the nature of the show. And again, if we're talking about pulp writing, if we're talking about weird fiction, this is normal. Like, this is consistent. And I don't mind it because it's very easy to, one, identify the role someone plays, but it also lets you know that if someone is torn between two worlds, that they might look more subtle. And so it really gives you the contrast and the outlines for all the other characters. Now, Ash, you mentioned that you imagine him in a seersucker suit. I imagine him being sort of more like Christopher Lee's Saruman. So looks like you were right. He looks a lot more like you imagined.
I know. I did miss the accent, though. I feel like that's a missed opportunity. I know it's set in the Northeast, but just even with the way he carried himself, he looked like one of those classic, like, Southern terrible, racist gentlemen that are very wealthy. And, but I thought Tony Goldwyn did great. I think he did a great job in portraying in just one episode how evil this dude is, which leads us into his offspring, which is Christina. So we finally got to meet Christina this week. The way I would describe her in short form, she delivers trimmer vampires in expensive clothing. She's a victim of misogyny, but not a good guy. So let's go to the trimmer vamp thing. So this episode, we kind of talked last time about these vampiric creatures that we argued whether or not they were vampires. And this week we find out that they're subterranean, that they're the watchdogs for this organization. And Christina seems to be the person that is controlling them. So she is not allowed to be a part of this order that her father runs because she is a woman, but she clearly still has let's call it power. She still has some sort of innate powers because she's able to control these creatures, and she's not afraid to literally get her hands dirty. She goes and she delivers baby Shoggoth or whatever the monster is supposed to be. And she looks like a proud mother. She's not afraid of them. So she maybe isn't able to participate, but she loves this world that her father is a part of. I think that was made very clear. When I say she's a victim of misogyny, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I think we've created this really interesting dynamic between she and our other characters because she is also othered in a way. There's an aspect of her that is othered and forces her to not be a part of this organization that should technically be her birthright. But she, like I said, is not a good guy. She may have removed the spells from, Latisha and George while they're in their rooms. She may have helped out Tick in some ways, but she didn't exactly save him. She didn't exactly warn him for what was to come. And she's still participating in that terrible peeping Tom watch party where they're all watching what's going on in the various rooms. So Christina is maybe not her dad, but we're certainly, I don't think, going to put her in the good guy category by any means.
We spoke earlier this season about that concept of intersectionality when it comes to Atticus, right? He's a veteran and a Black man and a bibliophile. Well, Christina, we get it here as well. I think we're meant to be considering, based on this episode and the interactions between Christina and Atticus, that they're both othered in their own respective ways, as you mentioned, Ash. He points out that even a Black man is allowed at the lodge dinner, whereas she is not. So she certainly has some resentment toward her father, while, as you mentioned, still trying to be part of this order.
Yeah, and she has some help in this order. We meet her partner, her helper, and that is William. So for those of us that are book readers, William, as we talked about on the preview pod, is a character we were not expecting. He's kind of this amalgam of different characters that we were expecting to see on screen, but it's being presented a little differently with Christina being a part of this story. As far as defining William, he's super blonde. I think he looks like a Targaryen extra from Game of Thrones. He's so blonde. King B, I think, said it best. He looks like kind of a cheap Alexander Skarsgård, and he isn't the butler. Which I was expecting him to be when he answered the door. And he very much so far has acted like the butler because he is kind of taking care of everyone, explaining things. We don't know if he's in the order. He certainly wasn't in robes and wasn't in black tie participating in the order's activity. So I'm assuming that he's not a statue right now. And if you've watched the previews, perhaps you also have seen him in future previews, so you know that he's not a statue. So I'm going to assume, please write in if you think that we are incorrect, that he's not in the order. But like Christina, I also don't think he's a good guy. Just because he's not in a robe, just because he's not turned to stone, he, again, hasn't really helped our characters other than given them food and shown them their rooms. And I think his connection to Christina is still really mysterious, let's call it. This is something I am most interested in so far in this episode, is figuring out what their connection is. Is he having sex with her? Is he her friend? She's very coy when they ask her about that. Is it her brother? Although I guess then he would be in the order. I mean, I don't know. I'm confused as to who he is, and I'm excited because I think this little mystery is going to be interesting to see unfold over the next few weeks.
So I have two big questions about William. The first one is, could they not have afforded Matthew McConaughey? Because that would have been fucking incredible. And the second question is, could he be Christina? Now, they were kind of secretive about this, and they haven't been secretive about much in the run-up to this show. But several viewers, and I believe also in Lovecraft Live on Twitch, were kind of asking that question. Are these the same people? Does Christina use William as a way to get around in the male world, right? Or a way to, as some sort of a Fletch Lives master disguise?
I think that that's definitely a possibility. And I get really annoyed when people notice obvious things that I don't. And when people started talking in Lovecraft Live, I was like, how did I not think about that? Because you never see them in the same room together in this episode. They're never together. And they do look like they favor. I mean, they could be brother and sister. So I think that's really interesting. And I think that would be a really incredible idea that she's passing, through this male conduit that she's able to spell herself to be. I think that's really fascinating. And then the final character that we're going to talk about, we were introduced to him in name last week, and we got to meet him this week. And that is the character of Montrose. So this is Atticus's dad. We're not quite sure. It's the dad that Atticus believes is his father.
Well, she was my dad.
He's a very curmudgeonly, anti-sci-fi horror guy. And he's cranky when they find him after he emerges from the dirt in this miraculous escape. We know that The Count of Monte Cristo is his favorite book, and he uses that to find his way out. And we don't know a whole lot about him yet, other than the fact that he is not very easy to please and that he's very frustrated that they are all there, they being George, Latisha, and Tick. He's frustrated that they're there. He thought he was going to get out on his own. He thought he was scot-free. And now, of course, we have the tragedy that happens at the end of this episode that I think is going to complicate further this relationship we're seeing unfold between he and Tick.
I really liked having the character of Montrose show up because he is so grounded and he is so resistant to the fanciful. I mean, we saw George and Latisha and Atticus really wowed by this lodge, kind of Scooby-Dooing their way through the episode. And so it was nice to see this character who is much more grounded. He's not the object of the Order's designs at all. He's only being used as bait, which brings us to Atticus. So why is Atticus so important? Now, Montrose is the bait, Atticus is the prey. And to understand that, you really got to understand the lineage that is going on in this family. And so I wanted to take a couple minutes to explore that, just to make sure it's clear to everybody watching, because I don't think they did a fantastic job of expressing that through the TV show. So you start out with Titus. Now, Titus is the founder of this Ardham Lodge. He's responsible for that 1833 disaster that William is talking about, where the lodge basically exploded. The guy in the giant painting who looks like Saruman, I finally got my wish, that's Titus. Now, things you should know about him. He was operating in Massachusetts in the 1800s. He was a slave owner. And when William says that Titus was kind to his slaves, he means that Titus was fucking slaves. Basically, this dude is the Massachusetts version of Grindelwald, and he impregnated a slave named Hannah.
So I really hate it when you steal my references. This is why when we think so similarly that it becomes a problem, because I had written down both Saruman with next to it Jean got his way and Grindelwald. So you stole both. But what I do think is really cool is that painting that we get to see of him is so imposing. And this actually plays into what was my favorite part of the episode dialogue wise, which is where we see this man that's clearly a white man in a hood, and the hood is very triangular shaped. And that's when Tick makes the reference to the KKK. And I think we needed that here. I think we needed to see this underlying connection that the show is drawing between white men that want to be superior and have used their race to become superior and hurt others, that this is an extension of that. Like, this is the ultimate extension, that white men want these type of white men, not all white men, but these type of white men, these dangerous white men that are so racist and driven by this need for power, that this is the ultimate end for them, is immortality. free, right? Like their own ability to truly control their lives and control everyone around them. And that painting spoke volumes, and the conversation they had underneath it about how, important this man was. And later with Christina about how the KKK was too poor for them to associate with. I think all of that was really brilliant.
Now, the most important character in this episode, I would argue, is Hannah. And we don't see a lot of her, but the role that she plays is really critical in this story. So Hannah is this impregnated slave. She survives the destruction of the lodge. She escapes into the woods. The important part here is that Hannah was the only person carrying a direct descendant of Titus Braithwhite, the guy in the painting. That means that Samuel and Christina, they're only related to Titus in an extended family sort of way. They have less of those, rich white guy midichlorians, right? So Hannah escapes, and apparently she's got this book, and she starts a new life away from Ardham. Interesting fact about this that makes it even muddier is that slavery in Massachusetts was kind of technically abolished in 1781 and 1783 because of these two lawsuits that occurred in those years. But what people don't realize, especially today, is that slavery was not like a clean, cut and dry thing. Depending on where you were in the country and specific lawsuits and technicalities, you could or could not be kept as a slave. So it wasn't until 1836 where they made the ruling that any slave brought into Massachusetts would be declared free. So it is consistent that Hannah could have been a slave in 1833. It is possible. Now, fast forward 100 years, Hannah's escaped, she started a new life, and you get Atticus's mother, Dora, and she gives birth to Atticus. Now, we've heard earlier in the season that she's sort of reluctant to talk about her people and where they come from. And I think we have three reasons that explain that. One is possibly because of the slavery angle. Two is possibly because of this occult connection to this nasty old wizard. But three, and possibly the most likely or more powerful reason, is that it's dangerous to go back there. She is trying to protect her family from everything that has happened at Ardham and could happen in the future at Ardham.
That vision of her where she's standing there with the book of names, I think this is huge foreshadowing for us. I think that obviously we're going to have a book of names coming our way that maybe explains more to Tick what this lineage is. Tick is a mix of Dora and moving back to Hannah's lineage. He's got that Titus Braithwhite lineage inside of him. And if you mix that with George, who's obsessed with the supernatural, who may potentially be his father, and if nothing else has clearly been a father figure to him throughout his life, I think that we've got a really interesting opportunity for what feels like a fitting origin story for a great wizard a la Dumbledore or a superhero. And it feels like that's what the show is kind of setting us up for here.
So that brings us, Ash, to Atticus, the last direct descendant of Titus Braithwhite. That's why he's important. When they get captured, the show flashes from Atticus and company being captured. They wreck the car, Latisha and George get shot. And then we see Atticus's mind-blowing body being bathed and robed for this ritual, #Assicus. Jonathan Majors' ass, it is a piece of art. Anyway, he's basically being used as a battery to power a ritual in the same place where the ritual decimated the lodge in 1833.
Yeah, I paused the episode in this scene, much like I did in Game of Thrones with the big Jon Snow ass reveal. There are these big HBO moments. I mean, it was quite impressive. But I think that one thing that wasn't maybe as impressive here is there was this huge missed opportunity, I think, to see this magic. I wanted to see, I don't know about you, how like Latisha was healed. I wanted to see some cool spelly thing, where did Christina heal her? Did, Samuel heal her? How did it work? I also wanted it to be explained too. It almost looked like Tick was in like a Tesla type contraption there with the way that the things were all arranged and set up. And this isn't a criticism of the show. I'm just hoping that moving forward, we're not just getting more exposition about the characters, but also this supernatural piece that I think is really cool and pretty interesting.
Well, speaking of the supernatural, Ash, you did some research into the Order of the Ancient Dawn. Now, again, it's one of those things that they kind of gloss over very quickly in the book. There's some guys in bow ties. We know there's some magic going on. What specifically is happening with the Order of the Ancient Dawn?
So in the episode, they make very clear to say that this chapter of the Order of the Ancient Dawn are called the Adamites. So their exact name are the Adamites Order of the Ancient Dawn. And actually is a sect of Christianity that are referred to, or they refer to themselves as the Adamites. They practice Christianity in the nude to mimic their founder's choice of non-clothing back in the Garden of Eden. And they have a reputation, or had a reputation, of living what Christianity would call fairly worldly. Like they were hedonistic in many ways, and they didn't believe in marriage, most specifically. Also, the Adamites that really existed, they also wanted to be close to the Garden of Eden. That's a big thing within their faith. So like Samuel in this episode, the actual Adamites wanted to find a way to make themselves divine, to make themselves immortal like Adam was. And so here, Samuel and the Order are trying to use Tick to open up this portal to the Garden of Eden to kind of do exactly that. The hope for them is that if they walk through this portal that's being adorned with all these beautiful flowers and ivy as the spell kind of takes its hold, that if they walk through that doorway, they will enter the garden, and upon entering the garden will receive that power of immortality.
Now, Ash, you alluded to this earlier in the episode. They are doing something very specific here in this ritual, which is they're using a black man to power their dreams. Their daily life, the Order of the Ancient Dawn, is already beyond the reach of the common man. I mean, these guys are living in luxury. They've got everything they could possibly want, and yet they still want more. I don't think that this is an accidental choice by the author, Matt Ruff, or the showrunner, Misha Green. Like, this is very, very specific. And you guys mentioned this on Lovecraft Live on Twitch, but this is very Get Out. And it's also why rich and powerful people always end up weird.
They're pretty weird. And one of the things that I think is strange that I think may have been very confusing for some people based off of the feedback we've received is they refer constantly to the language of Adam. And if you watch the show with subtitles like I do, because I have hearing loss, it says in the language of Adam. And then, that's what Samuel is speaking. So let's read between the lines and what is the language of Adam. So the ceremony that's being done is spoken in this language. This is the language that the Order and all of their writings about their organization, other than apparently the bylaws, which must be in English because that's how George read them. But their official texts are written in the language of Adam. And Tick is supposed to read in this language. But interestingly enough, the belief of the language of Adam is that we all speak it. That we all know how to speak it, but we have somehow forgotten that we know how. And when you truly are supernatural in terms of having these powers and the powers of magic and over, the elemental parts of the world, like this Order is, you are able to read it again. You remember how to read it. Now, in the book, this is explained a lot more, and we don't want to keep comparing it to the book because this show is going complete left turn from the book. But there's this whole thing in there about the language that's explained a bit more. They kind of trade that here for the ghost of Hannah that we talked about before, and that Tick sees her in the portal, and there's this scene of him running out behind her rather than really spending time on the language of Adam. But with them speaking in it, with her escaping with that book, which we've got to assume is written in this language, that language of Adam's certainly going to be coming back around. And to kind of sum up the rest of the Order, we shouldn't assume that because these guys all got Medusa'd and turned into stone and destroyed, that doesn't mean that this Order is gone. This is just one particular sect of the Order of the Ancient Dawn. There are multiple sects. They're all out there. I think we very much will see them raise their very blonde and white heads again quite soon in the episodes to come. And thankfully, George, I don't know if you guys noticed, but he had a copy of their bylaws when he was running out. So he escaped with that book. So obviously our group's going to have some information on them so that hopefully they're more prepared for their next encounter.
I'm glad you brought up that difference because it's important to note artistic choices that were made by the showrunners and what they might be trying to tell us, right? And in that way, the book can serve as a very interesting, powerful guide. Bringing Hannah into the picture and changing the focus there, it is a move of empowerment as well, because instead of this being the Adamites and the Order's game and the language being manipulated by Atticus to fight back against them. Instead, he is receiving this guidance or this cosmic echo from a Black woman, and that's an important decision that they made. It's not an accident again. So excellent point in bringing that up.
Yeah, and I think it also gives us more room to explore the characters too, when we're not kind of limiting ourselves. I think that they've left themselves open, the showrunners have, like to explore these characters and explore what it means, because they referred to in the first episode, this is his birthright. So what does that really mean? What does a birthright really entail? Now, we do get to see in this episode some of the powers of the Order of the Ancient Dawn. We don't get to see them heal, but we do get to see these hallucinations, these powers of forgetting that they're able to wield over people that are not within their order. And that starts with the opener. I don't know about you, Jean, but I was very nervous again. Last episode, I was nervous when the episode started with the opener. This episode, I was nervous when they're all jumping around and moving on up. I was like, what's happening? They've just escaped from these monsters. They had blood all over them. Maybe not the time for a dance number, right? Like it felt very strange, but I think it was really cool, the reveal that we get, which is that it's because they don't remember, that George and Latisha, they just don't remember what happened to them. And so they are now in rooms that seem to hold some significance for the characters. So George, he's got shelves upon shelves of books that he's just able to go and consume at will. And Latisha has that closet where all of these haute couture pieces perfectly fit her. She looks fantastic in them. They almost seem to be in like their own little personal heavens. But then you've got Tick. Because he remembers, it's a nice room, it's a fancy room, but it isn't something with like a special trapping for him. It isn't something that's going to distract him from what's going on. And now I took that it's because he actually remembers the attacks, and that shows that the Order and maybe even the house itself, like very Shining here, right? Like got into like the Shining territory, that the house itself has power over these people that are within it and is smart in some way.
I literally put down in my notes, The Shining ? And Ash, I was thinking the same thing. Like Atticus must have some inherent degree of immunity just, again, by birthright, by the nature of what he is. They can't do to him what they can do to Latisha and what they can do to George.
Yeah, and then we go from, let's call them their little heavens, to three very distinct hells. So when Tick says to Christina, if you're my friend, then lift this spell on them, and she does, and they all start screaming because they remember the horrors they experienced, quickly things devolve into not so fun times for our three main characters here. The rooms become torture chambers of sorts, and each experience that we're going to see them have, it seems to be one of their deepest fears that's kind of revealed for the delight of these men that are watching in the wings.
And this scene took me back to the fight scenes in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, which deserves to be read by everyone on Earth. You have these rich, empowered men who want to extract every ounce of value from the marginalized. And so they have Atticus and they want his power, of course, that he has inherited from Titus Braithwhite. But even with Latisha and George, they can't just leave them alone. They will extract whatever value they can from them as well, even if that's simple entertainment. I don't think this scene was well executed. The portals looked kind of goofy. There was like a cocktail party thing going on. I don't think it was done well, but the sentiment itself is smart.
Come on, now it looked just like Buffy. It looked just like the portals that Buffy used to fall through.
Yes,
that she killed Angel and pushed him through. It should not be
not be the high water mark for TV.
Right. But that's what it looked like. But I do agree with you. I think that I love what you said there, that we're going to extract every ounce of value, and suffering has value, right? I mean, look at like Real Housewives of Beverly Hills that we watch, or Vanderpump Rules. Those people are suffering, and we're sitting at home and we're consuming them in a way. We're consuming their experience, and that's what we're watching here. And that starts, we're going to start with Tick, because we're going to go through all three of them. So Tick, he's got this really violent encounter in his own little personal torture chamber. I did confirm the actress there is Jamie Chung that he is fighting with. She's in the fatigues. It's the same person who plays the Martian woman in the series opening sequence. I still personally am of the mind that this is the woman on the other end of the phone in episode 1 when he calls Korea. So I think it's a lot of questions here. Does he kill this woman in real life? Is this a family member of the person that he's calling because he feels guilty about having to kill her? All of that kind of is yet to be seen, but we know there was something that kind of broke him in the war. Christina makes that statement of, they think that you've lost your marbles because of something that happened to you in Korea. I think we're seeing a glimpse of what that something is in this scene and the effect it still has on him. And I hope we get to explore that more.
I hate when they take an Asian character and they automatically know advanced Hollywood martial arts. I was like, are we really doing this? Now, to be fair, it was actually really well choreographed and fun to watch, but I had to remind myself, this is a hallucination. They're not presenting this as reality, because if it was reality, it would be utterly ridiculous. But it wasn't the most ridiculous thing we saw in this episode.
No, it looked better than the portals, and it certainly looked better than the snake dick, which is the next piece, which is Latisha's big moment. So Latisha here, she obviously has some sort of feelings for Tick that we're seeing kind of displayed in this scene. And then you kind of have the beginning part. And I actually wrote down Jean like, ooh, Jean was wrong. There is going to be, a sexual encounter between them, because you had talked about that last week about how they have a unique connection that maybe isn't sexual. And I was like, oh, well, they're going to have sex. But then she kind of stops, and it was clear that Tick was going to attempt to rape Latisha in this scene. And I think that if last week's marker of a faux pas for tech and CGI was the Coke can molded arm, then this week it's the snake dick. Because when that thing popped out of there, I thought that I was watching, a Charmed type show, like a WB, UPN type graphic, because it was pretty bad. It looked animated. And I also just personally thought it was very much an on the nose type reference that his dick is a snake that's going to bite her. I thought that was ridiculous. But I, like you, had to remind myself this is a hallucination and kind of go, well, maybe it's intentional. That camp, right? Maybe that is intentional.
And Ash, I thought the same thing with camp. I'm like, okay, maybe it's campy. Maybe it's supposed to reflect the absurdity of the magic. Like, it's cheap ass magic. It's not the good magic. But I don't know, man. It felt like they're making an earnest attempt to show me a snake dick. And when Atticus was unbuttoning his pants, guys, that's terrifying enough. Mm-hmm. Like, rape is terrifying enough. It doesn't have to be a snake. Like, literally, if there were people watching through these portals and they were trying to see a woman genuinely terrified, rape is enough. You don't need to animate it. It felt silly, just silly.
One thing that didn't feel silly was George's hallucination. We didn't have the crazy martial arts. We didn't have the snake penis. We had an encounter between two people that I actually thought was very genuine and kind of a nice moment. So in George's hallucination, it's a lot less violent than Latisha's and Tick's. And he is dancing with a woman named Dora, which we know is Atticus's mother. It's pretty clear based off of their interactions that they had a thing. I think that was pretty obvious. And I'm going, well, where is, Hippolyta and all of this? And you then find out in the conversation that George and Montrose have later that, well, clearly they did have a thing, and that George may potentially be Atticus's real father. Tick acts more like George than Montrose. I think it makes sense. But it also appears that Montrose knew about this because he said, we decided that shit a long time ago, so keep your fucking mouth shut. So obviously this is a family secret. Maybe this is why Montrose is so pissed off all the time, right? But there's a connection here between George and Dora that I think is going to obviously be important as we move ahead. But I think he got off easy. His hallucination was nowhere near the caliber that the other two's had. And maybe that also has some relevance moving forward.
His hallucination wasn't as bad as the other two. And it was also the most gripping and most interesting to me. And the George scenes made him one of my favorite characters on the show in very short order, right? He's very endearing. He's very warm. His outfits are incredible. And so it was really sad that the show killed off George, even though this is Lovecraft Country and this is HBO, so nobody stays dead for very long. But George's death, much like Montrose's appearance, it did lend some real consequences to an episode that otherwise felt sort of, like I said, Scooby-Doo. And George had an amazing scene in this episode. I'm glad that the character could contribute this to the series if he never comes back again, where he tells Atticus to never doubt his own worth or that he is good. And he says they want to make us question ourselves. They want to make us scared. This is one of those glimmers where the show is giving us a taste of that mature exploration of race and politics that I've been craving, right? Where it's a battle for the identity, that these hallucinations weren't just entertainment for rich white people, but in fact, it was a way to psychologically break them into breaking their sense of worth, which is one of the first and most powerful ways you subjugate a people.
I have to say, Courtney B. Vance chewed up every scene that he was in. He was fantastic. But I did read an interview with him today where he confirmed that this is it for the season, that he knew from the get-go that Misha Green was only going to have him be in 2 episodes. So I was really bummed because I was like you. I was hoping we were going to have some magic pulled out. Maybe that's how Tick realizes he has magic powers. I don't know, something set up in the next episode, but apparently it's not going to be the case. And it's a bummer because he was very dynamic and I think that he was important, although, his death could really move the story forward in terms of Tick. I've gotten so many messages today about the monster. That's birthed from the cow. Just wanted to say that I did a little bit of research about what King B said last night about, the fact of why this monster is birthed in that way. I know that we had a lot of people in the Discord have their own biologically based theories about this. And it turns out that this is very much a tribute to Lovecraft, that in Lovecraftian horror, it's almost like a host body. So they use another animal to host this monster in, and then the monster births the animal. Usually the host dies in the process, like an alien bursting through the chest. Here, it looks like the cow survives to maybe birth another Tremor vampire another day. But I don't know if these will show up again in terms of CGI and the money they spent crafting these guys. To those of you out there who asked, that's your answer. It is a tribute to Lovecraft, and it's not part cow. It's just a host.
Well, Ash, that brings us to the voicemail and email portion of the deep dive for Lovecraft Country. If you'd like to call in, our number is 914-719-SHAT, or you can email us at host@shatontv.com. We have an assortment of voicemail and email this week, and we'll start with the voicemail. The first one comes from Steve in Minnesota.
Hey, Shat crew, it's Steve from Minnesota. Just calling about episode 1 of Lovecraft Country. Thought it was a great show. Loved the episode. I didn't think it was too fast. I mean, potentially could have used more, but also love that it taught me about sundown counties and towns. Just like Watchmen introduced me to Tulsa, this introduced me to that. I think it's going to be great looking at the trailer. I'm really looking forward to the other episodes and your guys' coverage. Great as always. Thanks.
So I think that Steve brings up a good point here about learning about things. I read an article today that was talking about the importance when it comes to race and especially the Black experience, that we can't count on institutions that are systemically racist themselves, like public schools, to really tell the story and kind of explain the whole history. And so we have to assume as a society that public school and your typical education takes you only so far. And then it's up to us culturally through art and through all means of art to fill in the blanks that are left and the holes that are left. And I mean, I love that Steve brings up the Tulsa riot. I am embarrassed to say I learned about that while watching Watchmen. Sundown towns, I believe I've heard of them before, but I did a ton more research after watching the episode to learn more about them. The Green Book aspect, I mean, all of that, I think it is up to art and those who cover art to fill in those blanks. And I think he's got a great point, and I'm certainly enjoying that so far in this series.
Well, thanks, Steve, for being a longtime listener and calling in. Our next one, speaking of the Green Book, comes from Tawana, who called in last week. This is Tawana in Bermuda.
Hi, guys. This is Tawana Tannic calling back just to say, wow, like color me shocked. So surprised that you actually played my message and that you responded to it. Really gobsmacked. To your point, I think it's Big D. To your point, Big D, yeah, you're absolutely right. I should not have perhaps used the word ignorant, although I will confess. And, this is going to be rambling, so I don't expect you to play it, or you can edit it any way you see fit. But I do confess I am one of those people who do believe there are stupid questions, which is terrible considering I used to be a history teacher many, many years ago. But I think more importantly to your point is that, although I'm Bermudian, I went to Spelman, of course, which is liberal arts, HBCU in the South, and studied, my degree was the African diaspora and the world, right? So, and then I went on to teach history. So for me, I often forget that there are other people who just don't have this experience, right? They haven't lived, breathed, and eaten it. And so become easily shocked to think, oh, wow, I don't understand that. So, you're absolutely right. Should not have said ignorant. But more importantly, just thank you for responding to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening, but not only listening, thank you for hearing. I told my daughter that I called in and we discussed it and we actually watched the book together. She literally just graduated from Spelman as well. And she said, oh, but I bet you they didn't respond. And I said to her, actually, no, they did respond. And she said, and what did they do? Did they get an attitude? And I was like, no, they discussed it. It was actually great. So just wanted to say, you still got a fan in me. Thank you very much for responding, but more importantly, for actually, taking time to think it through and just give it a recent response, which I know in no way expected. I expected that it would go into the annals of Shat recordings and just never be seen or heard from again. So I really appreciate it. And of course, keep up the good work. Like I said, you've gotten us through the pandemic so far. And I look forward to your next episode.
I'm so glad there's someone out there who uses gobsmacked in the normal day conversation. Yes. It made me so happy. Tawana, your voicemail in general just absolutely made my day when I heard it. We very much believe in responding to feedback. We read every word and listen to every word of emails and voicemails that come in. It takes up hours of our week that we are glad to give because we do this because, like I said last week, this is a community of listeners and we appreciate your feedback. And I also love that the Big D King Bee voice issue has happened again. Everybody confuses them. And I'll just say this, I'm an educator as well. I think educators in general believe that with adults, there are stupid questions. So I can relate to you on that. And we appreciate you. And thanks so much for calling back. Keep it up. Call every week, Tawana. Call every week.
Tawana, I don't know if you understand fully the gift that you've given us with this voicemail as well, because it gives us so much more confidence when we do make statements, when we do cover the show, because it's scary. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot is that when we make these recordings and we put them out there, they're out there forever. And they're out there for thousands of people. And you don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to sound ignorant. You don't want to come off as insensitive. And the best thing we can do is try our best and, admit when we're wrong or, listen to what we said and say, yeah, actually, this listener's right. One of my biggest fears with our team is as we cover shows, Ash and I have kind of carried this banner for Shat in moving Shat on TV in a direction where we want to be as hyper aware and accurate as possible. We're always going to fall short because like you pointed out, we don't have every experience in the world. So Ash brings wonderful, rich experience from her background. I try to bring as much as I can from mine. King B brings his as well. There are places where we fall short, and all that we ask is that people be forgiving. And the fact that you are open to that and heard us as we heard you, it really means a lot. Okay, next up, we have one from Flavor Dave.
Dropbox, Shat on TV, Lovecraft Country. Second follow-up voicemail. Hi, y'all. This is David Stilley, a.k.a. Flavor Dave. I wanted to send a sober voicemail this time around. all nice and Brad Adams tale. So, real quick, I'm a very, very vivid dreamer. This kind of like had nothing to do with it. I'm a very vivid dreamer. I dream every night, lucid dreamer, all that shit. About 2 months ago, I had a dream that Cthulhu came and wreaked havoc to the eastern part of the United States. And he wasn't a squid-faced, bat-winged Davy Jones motherfucker. He was a half teddy bear, half Buddha kind of thing. But I digress. The first episode, I'm like, oh wow, Sundown Town. Oh, I remember listening to a Small Town Murder episode, and they were talking about that in Illinois, which I thought was really fucked up that it was in Illinois back in the 60s, a sundown town. But yeah, man, they're around, and that's scary shit. And I got upset because you know where you're at. You're in a bad fucking area. And you guys decide to pull off the side of the road and just smell the fucking flowers in the woods and shit. Get the fuck out of there. But anyways, one more thing. I don't know if anybody noticed in the beginning intro, I could be wrong, but in the trench scene, when the trench warfare, he bayonets the guy, right? And I could have sworn the very next scene was a repeat. Like they did the same scene again of him stabbing a motherfucker with a knife. But anyways, that's all I had to say. King, I hope you're enjoying your trip. King B, I'm sorry for bailing on you Tuesday night. It won't happen again. And Ash, I think you got a hurricane coming for you. Well, anyways, thanks guys. Love what you're doing. Keep it up and just sound everyone. Bye, y'all.
This is my favorite voicemail ever.
We met Flavor Dave. He messaged me like on Instagram, was like, hey, Jane, just out of nowhere. And I was like, hey, dude, why don't you come hang out with us on Discord and play video games with us? Like the dude just showed up and immediately was part of the gang. We'll communicate in real time while playing video games. And this is just Dave.
Well, and he brings up a really fantastic point, which is why didn't they just get the fuck out of there? Because I kind of felt the same way the whole time they're in the house. It's like, why are you eating the dinner? Like, why are you asking for salt? Which I think is a horror movie trope, right? Like, people don't ever get out when they're supposed to. It's an absolutely fantastic voicemail. And I do have a hurricane, hopefully not coming at me anymore. Don't jinx me, Flavor Dave. I am now out of the fucking cone by time we're recording this. And when this is released, it's when the hurricane's hitting. So this will either be a celebration of the fact that I was right or a really ominous prediction of what's to come. So thanks so much for calling. I like Tawana. Please call in every week, Flavor Dave, please.
All right. Thanks for all of our voicemails, guys. Again, if you want to call in, it's 914-719-SHAT. We'll move on to email. And the first one comes from a longtime listener, John Lish, with a few of his thoughts on Lovecraft Country.
Welcome back, guys. It's really pleasing to hear you getting back into the saddle with Lovecraft Country. I don't know anything about the book, and my knowledge of Lovecraft is limited, so I'm pretty much open-minded as to where the show can go. I did watch Reanimator in the mid-'80s as a schoolboy. Our local video store didn't care that a lad in his school uniform rented 18-rated videos, which was my introduction to Lovecraft, but apart from a few cultural references, not much exposure. I was also pleased to hear that you were looking to be careful as to the discussions over race and giving space to Black voices. As a white British bloke who lives in a city, Birmingham, that's moving towards ethnic majority, i.e. no one culture or skin color will have a majority population, in the next decade or so, we are seeing a debate over roles and opportunities as COVID-19 has affected BAME families more. The British experience of race and racism has a different cultural expression to that in your country. We kept our brutality offshore, which has led to a pretense that we are more decent. George Floyd's death has opened up discussion here, which has exposed a gap between overt and covert racism and how white and non-white Brits think. All this is a long-winded way of saying I am looking forward to hearing different voices discussing the show through your platform. I always enjoy that aspect of the Shat family, but given my distance from where the opening episode grounded the world in, it's essential. Take care, Shat family. John Lish.
I love hearing these perspectives from around the world, much like Tawana gives us from Bermuda, just hearing the view of America from Europe in particular. And, you know, we had a case just Sunday night with Jacob Blake's shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And it's just a reminder that the issues that we're discussing here, even though Lovecraft Country is set in the 50s, this is currently relevant, means that the show is doing its job and that the podcast is hopefully of service as well. Thanks for writing in, John. Next up, we have one from Dominique.
Hi there. First of all, I love a podcast about shows with reviews I don't always agree with. That being said, this is for King B. I think. I'm still learning your voices from on this pod. You mentioned after the final listener letter that the show felt torn between focusing on racism and monsters or mythical creatures. But I'd argue that the show is about monsters. Everyday monsters like racism that hunt, maim, kill, and infect others. And mythical monsters that basically do the same thing. The show's focus is monsters. As a Black woman, I felt that so clearly from beginning to end. The same way the Walking Dead crew navigates zombies as a part of their everyday is the same way I navigate racist towns, aggressive police, etc. The monsters we know, we adjust to or find creative ways to fight. The monsters we don't know take a terrifying learning curve, as in how they handled racist white people versus the real monsters. Love the pod. Keep the dialogue going. Dominique.
Now, King B couldn't be with us on this episode, but I'd like to speak for him in saying that I think his point was that the stage is very crowded and that the message might get muddled by the monsters, which is to say that perhaps a overt focus on Lovecraftian monsters, Shoggoth, what have you, would take our attention away from racial issues and that kind of monster, where that feels crammed in the show. Essentially saying that a show or movie can't focus on too many things at one time, especially when those two things are as disparate as real world institutional racism and fantastic horror creatures, right? I think that's what he was going for. But I totally see what you're saying, Dominique, here, which is that there are horrors from end to end in this show. Do we have enough time on the show to explore both in depth, and are we focusing on the right thing?
Well, I think to that point, too, I think that what you say here, Dominique, in terms of the obvious metaphors of the monsters for the real world monsters, I'm hoping that that actually becomes more clear as we go because, you know, they refer to these things as vampires. I hope we see something that is more vampiric in nature because like Jean was talking about, you know, the consumption, these white people that are consuming the Black people that are in this home, they're consuming all aspects of them. They're using them in every way, much like literal, you know, the use of the work and their toil and their life and their physicality during slavery. Here they're consuming their suffering and consuming Tick's magic that is inside of him. And I hope to see more of a comparison between the monsters on screen with the real life monsters that unfortunately are still walking around in 2020.
Thank you, Dominique, so much for your email and great response, Ash. Finally, we have an email from Susan from State College who wrote in last week and is back with another banger.
Hello, Ashley, King B, and Jean. A special thank you to Ashley for hosting the Twitch stream and channeling the voice of King B. I had to look up the Necronomicon because my memories of Lovecraft's work are vague and murky. Lovecraft wrote a history, pseudo-history of the Necronomicon that was published after his death. He wrote that it was written by Abdul al-Hazred from Yemen, who had traveled from Babylon to Memphis, Egypt, gathering information about the elder gods in 700 CE. The book was translated from Arabic to Greek, banned, burned, rediscovered, and generally made the rounds as an ancient tome of occult knowledge that gave great power and always ended badly for the reader. So in Lovecraft Country, the book Hannah is carrying from the burning mansion is in all likelihood the Book of Names. I also suspect she set the fire that burned down the building and killed all the members of the order. Well, almost all. But what I found interesting is how her appearance in the portal to Eden may have caused the destruction of the mansion and acolytes. Was she also a practitioner? And like Christina, could never be part of the order no matter how proficient she was? Had she booby-trapped the portal knowing that her bloodline would be a surviving line of Braithwight and expendable for the ceremony? And one of her descendants could be used to access the portal? So many questions. Also, I am very sad that George died. He was a fantastic character. I suspect the mention of Tulsa while he is dancing with his dream first love is a clue to how he lost her and his children that she also mentions, and might also be the reason he started writing the Safe Travel Guide. Stay safe, Susan from State College.
So, Susan, I agree that George was a fantastic character, and I was sad that he died. I don't think they give us enough to go on in this episode to determine exactly what happened with Dora. With regard to the Book of Names, it seems like the Book of Names is the opposite of the Necronomicon, right? Like a book of life, whereas the Necronomicon is the book of death. Again, we've only seen it in passing and only heard of it like secondhand from George. So we're not exactly sure what's going on there. But the fact that Hannah ran out with it kind of leads me to believe that it is somewhere out there to be found.
But I really appreciate this research, Susan. I actually didn't do research on it because I thought that your email actually summed things up pretty nicely for us. And just to plug Shat the Movies here, we will be covering The Mummy this week, which also deals with the Book of Names and the Book of the Dead. And so I think that's really interesting how these stories are pretty pervasive in all cultures. They're pretty pervasive and kind of come back around again that different authors write about in different ways, because we've got how Lovecraft writes about it, we've got how it's portrayed in The Mummy, and we've also got, for instance, how it's portrayed in a movie like Cabin in the Woods or in Evil Dead. And so this is a thread that I think connects lots of horror and lots of sci-fi, and I think you were spot on with what you have here.
Thanks for writing in, Susan. And that does it for our email, for our voicemail, and for the entire episode. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Lovecraft Country. We hope you enjoyed it and will join us next week for more. If you haven't already, please follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website, again, is shatontv.com, and you can email us at host@shatontv.com. If you don't want us to read your email on the air, that's fine. Just go ahead and put that in your email so we know not to read it, and we'll just read it and respond to you privately. You can also call us at 914-719-SHAT and catch us all week on Twitch live. You can see the whole schedule there at www.shatontv.com/Twitch. And old episodes of Twitch will be up on YouTube. So just go to Shat on TV YouTube. Also, please check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies, where we join our good friend, Big D, Dick Ebert, to cover 80s and 90s movies commissioned by you, the listeners. As Ash mentioned, we're doing The Mummy this week, so do check that out. You can find past and future episodes at shatthemovies.com and wherever our fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. And as I mentioned earlier, I did want to bring up something that we don't say enough on the podcast, especially on a podcast like Lovecraft Country, and that is that Black Lives Matter. That is a very important message for me personally, and for Ash and for the King Bee. Again, in light of the Jacob Blake shooting and the unresolved case of Breonna Taylor and the lack of justice for George Floyd, it is something that we should be saying all the time as we watch Lovecraft Country and reminding people that it is vastly important to us. On behalf of my co-hosts, Ashley Schlafly, the King Bee, and Big D, Dick Ebert, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us Friday night for our first Lovecraft Country Shappy Hour cocktail party. That'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern. And then again on Sunday night, immediately after Lovecraft Country, where we will do Lovecraft Live, interacting with you and discussing Lovecraft Country Episode 3, Holy Ghost.
And as always, stay the fuck at home.